I just want to open with a quick introduction. I'm Maggie. I am a PhD candidate right here at the University of Toronto's Faculty of Information. I am a Connaught Fellow for Public Impact and a Massey Junior Fellow, and my area of research is the political economy of pornography platforms. So I've also written some popular work for The Conversation and the Walrus. I love events like this because I think so many of you, I'm sure, have thoughts on this topic that you don't have very many venues to publicly express those thoughts in. I do want to disclose that Pornhub is the subject of my talk and it's my primary site of study, but their parent company, MindGeek, was acquired by a private equity firm called Ethical Capital Partners back in March, and I have been brought on to their 6-member advisory board, so I now offer direct consultation for the company regarding the platform's operations. I want to say that my own research is totally independent and critical, but I think that in the interest of transparency, it's important that I always front load that, and I'm happy to discuss it further following the talk. So, since 2013, the streaming porn giant Pornhub has been releasing a steady stream of data visualization posts, sharing statistics and infographics about the viewing habits of their massive user base on something called the Pornhub Insights blog. As of today, there are more than 420 entries. And some of you may recognize these. For the uninitiated, I wanted to share a little cross-section tour of what they look like. They're bar charts and scatter plots and maps and graphs that summarize key takeaways from the Pornhub viewership. Staples include their annual year in review, classifying viewing preferences by country, entries detailing porn watching around various holidays. There's a lot of breakdowns of pop culture related content. Colorful posts are always titled things like digging deep into Minecraft or Ireland traffic during Hurricane Ophelia. And the data is positioned to tell us some entertaining stories about our own sexual tastes. Plus, it makes it easier to engage with the Pornhub brand on main. Now, Pornhub identifies their mission statement as follows. Insights is a research and analysis project directly from the Pornhub team. We've compiled data from billions of hits, all to explore the intricacies of online porn viewership. This PR approach has been successful. Insights Safe for Work posts routinely get circulated across social and news media. And in 2017, researcher Patrick Keelty here at the U of T found that global media news outlets were quoting or reporting on Insights findings almost daily. So the Insights blog is an admittedly brilliant PR vehicle. It somehow has repackaged these fraught combinations of platform surveillance and not safe for work porn content into these benign water cooler conversation talking points. But the graphs and pie charts seen here are not just conveying impartial observations. So today I want to review 3 areas. I want to talk about platform surveillance and communicative capitalism. I want to talk about how Insights claims are valorized through data visualization. And I want to talk a little bit about risk, liability, and the ongoing sanitization of pornography from the internet. So yeah, Insights' motto is digging deep into the data. And unlike most platforms who downplay their surveillance practices, Pornhub actually flaunts the fact that it collects a lot of data on its users. Porn consumption is something that's generally conceived of as a private viewing experience, but these platforms are fundamentally a business model that's premised on user surveillance. Platforms are not just websites. For some of you, this is going to be a return to the basics, but I wanted everyone to be on the same page. The platforms profit through these programmable infrastructures that connect users in something called a multi-sided market. It means software and hardware systems are facilitating interactions between users, producers, service providers, various third parties, independent developers, a whole host of different parties interact on a platform. This means that monetizing porn is no longer centered on traditional 2-party exchanges, buyer-seller transactions and the like, but instead it depends on network exchange. By connecting users in this network, Pornhub doesn't primarily profit selling original content or services as a site would have 15 years ago. Instead, they encourage activities that generate mass engagement, uploading, commenting, subscribing, clicking affiliate links, et cetera, et cetera. User data that is collected through these processes is then recycled through refining for targeted advertising, through software development, and for sale to data brokerages. It's called big data for a reason. This surveillance takes place on a totally unprecedented scale compared to earlier digital media models. Pornhub actually reaches over 130 million people daily as of the last year. So something very critical to making sense of this practice is that the site is part of an interconnected platform network that is under the control of one privately held company called MindGeek. MindGeek operates over 100 websites with subsidiaries including RedTube, YouPorn, GayTube, XTube, Brazzers, Digital Playground, Reality Kings, Men.com, and Playboy's online operations, just to name a few of them. MindGeek is consistently one of the top consumers' internet bandwidth globally, so needless to say, their operating model is successful. Now, MindGeek don't envision themselves as pornographers. They identify as a global industry-leading information technology firm that employs developers, engineers, programmers, online marketers, designers, and sales experts, all at the top of their game. Their concern isn't with pornography, but with generating traffic, improving SEO optimization, and ultimately with data collection. Now, this all makes sense when monetization maps directly onto the economic productivity of attention. Driven by this logic called communicative capitalism, the nature of what is being shared on these sites becomes secondary to a focus on mass engagement around that content. So all attention is equally valuable, which means platforms don't tend to be particularly concerned with old media standards around production. So the style or the quality of content on these sites doesn't really matter in these networks. This results in a huge prioritization of scale over substance on platforms like Pornhub. Basically, platforms are size queens, which means users are exponentially favoring these bigger and more popular and more recognizable experiences with which they feel familiar. And that concentrates on a winner takes all dynamic on some leading companies. As a result, MindGeek has accumulated a significant monopoly power at the expense of a more distributed market competition. That basically imbues them with the authority to set and enforce standards for the entire industry around operating models that they develop. So what do those look like on Pornhub? Now, unlike that sanitized tech startup aesthetic of MindGeek, Pornhub is cacophonously horny. Algorithmic curation and recommendation systems promote and catalog and index media inventories around metadata, which means titles, tags, and proximity to other popular content. Successful content on these sites largely relies on a popularity principle that correlates to feedback loops around provocative, controversial, and internally promoted content. Now in porn, some of these conventions may be familiar to you. Polemic content tends to get attention, meaning titles that emphasize incest or racial tension or brutality, intensity, transgressive themes, that all thrives in this environment. Pornhub strategically promotes content that's likely to go viral while suppressing less engaging options to keep audiences flowing. In many cases, the content of the video titles has nothing to do with the themes that they're proposing. But to succeed, creators will still apply those standards and users will keep seeing those established categories promoted. It really is a feedback loop. If you're interested in this, I cannot recommend this article enough. My stepdad's huge data set. You can Google it. Now, constructing consumer behavior like this is actually a quality not unique to Pornhub, it's common to all platforms. And network effects mean that their power echoes throughout larger media ecosystems. And a lot of research has shown that these not only shape our economic standards, but they actually influence our socio-cultural engagements with media. Basically, they're having an outsized influence on our perceptions of sexuality, which is quite bleak, frankly. But the market authority on platforms means that any real alternatives get suppressed. So audiences continue to concentrate around what this system deems popular. And that really leaves us all under the yoke of platforms' influence. So data, especially big data, is often positioned as a standard for reason and objectivity. But countering this, a lot of research has shown that data reflects the orders of power in the environments from which it is produced. Data sets, processing technologies, and analytic methodologies frequently show biases, ambiguities, and deep inaccuracies. But visualization gives the impression of conveying data with clarity and with integrity. These visuals appear to reveal complex ideas through simple designs, but they also are constructing knowledge through a perceptible object. A really well executed design is genius. It can be mistaken to give access to hidden concepts, difficult things without interference in the meaning along the way. But the graphics are actually producing a regime of truth that emphasizes authors' objectives while totally flattening out the context of the data. Jark van Wyk calls these lying graphics. It's hard to find reliable information on the porn industry. So Insights has produced this valorization of visualization as the benchmark of truth. As proprietary information from a private company, this is totally unverifiable. We have no idea how accurate it is. Besides, Pornhub, even if it is accurate, is not recording impartial observations they've made about users. They're actively constructing that behavior and emphasizing the most marketable details. So these are being circulated uncritically as fact throughout the media because there's no other data that news outlets can circulate. This tends to naturalize trends and categories that are constructed by private companies to impact popular discourses around our sexual preferences. That's pretty big. So what has Pornhub decided to do with all this power? I love this one. This one, absolutely delightful. Pornhub's based in Montreal. MindGeek offices are actually right here in Canada. So Insights is ultimately a PR mechanism, and these facts are generally quite silly. A lot of Pornhub's success comes from brand recognition, and Insights is just one of several tactics to become palatable to a broader mainstream audience. Pornhub Cares campaigns are run to save the bees and pandas and to support women in STEM. There are Save the Boobs and Save the Balls programs to raise funds for breast cancer and testicular research. Give America Wood is a tree planting initiative they run. These are all kind of fun, sanitary efforts designed to overcome a specific problem, which is the increasing sanitization and censorship of all sexual expression from broader platforms online. So on platforms, sexual expression is being totally moderated out of existence because internet governance is increasingly treating all sex like a liability. Anti-porn rhetoric has conflated this industry with trafficking and with non-consensual harm. Financial firms like credit cards completely refuse to operate with adult merchants or sexual providers. And discriminatory legislation, like 2018 SOSTA SESTA, has incentivized platforms to ban all sexual content and speech, or potentially face liability for sex trafficking. Now, not only porn, but all sex education, sexual health resources, queer expression, and LGBTQ2S+ communities are being made precarious by this ecosystem. So they're functionally being barred a significant chunk of participation in the democratic public sphere. Insights offers this Trojan horse for Pornhub to penetrate back into mainstream media, and they've made it possible to invoke Pornhub in settings where not safe for work content would normally be not allowed. But in this case, overcoming that censorship actually required desexing porn itself. So do the means justify the ends? Now, users don't have a lot of clarity around these proprietary machine learning technologies or automated systems that are shaping our browsing behavior, but we are profoundly curious about what other people are up to on Pornhub. So by converting this surveillance of millions of porn users into shareable data points, Insights has actually entertained these fantasies of collective looking through keyholes of technology. Now, scopophilia is a term that describes the pleasure we derive from looking at objects of eroticism or desire. Insights offers us a means to peep at each other, to be satisfied and titillated and sometimes scandalized by a productive scopophilic spectacle. After all, there's a thrill in knowing that we're being watched during private acts, even when the gaze of the other is a data mining surveillance process or an ad affiliate tracking software. But I'll close by summarizing this project's aims. So mirroring this communicative capitalism dynamic that we see driving MindGeek's actual business model, Insights content, what it is supposedly revealing, is ultimately far, far less important than what the entries are actually achieving. Unverifiable claims get taken up as fact, and they get amplified across media networks, and that drives more attention back to Pornhub. This creates this algorithmic feedback loop of horny taste making. It shapes our culture by valorizing some types of sexual expression while virtually eliminating others. Whether or not the public actually prefers stepbrothers or eggs, those constructs grab a whole lot of attention. And it's in the best interest of the platform to reify those standards as popular, but never to disclose their profound influence in constructing the same tastes. And that is all. I love it.
We're going to open questions now. The way that we'll do this is we'll try to alternate back and forth between in-person and online. If you have a question online, go ahead and type Q in the chat. Otherwise, I guess we'll start with people in person. If anybody has a question. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the talk. It's really great. I'm just wondering, you know, what kind of numbers or whatever related to like how effective insights law is for Pornhub. Like, without like what you got, I'm just thinking like, one seems like the barrel in my head, you know, people going in that porn. Like, I'm just wondering what's the impact of that has for Pornhub. You know, who's coming to the site?
Yeah.
So sorry, I'll do better for the next question, but just for people who are online, the question was around the efficacy of the Pornhub Insights for Pornhub as a company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think primarily it's a PR mechanism, because the thing about porn is there aren't always going to be audiences returning wherever they can find that kind of content. But by distinguishing themselves as the leader of the pack, as someone who can be discussed in kind of open forums, and as you know, a brand that is recognizable. Like a famous incident was Kanye West once brought up Pornhub, like I think on Jimmy Kimmel, and then they invited him to post the awards. It becomes a way of circulating the brand through popular discourse, more so than actually changing the way that traffic flows through news media happen. Because as long as they can maintain that lead, it's like the running away from a bear problem. You don't actually have to like perpetually outrun the bear, you just have to outrun the other guys. And so being able to constantly be in popular discourse means that they are really accumulating that attention and that winner takes all dynamic on the market. Yeah. So it's less about quantifiable metrics and more that they maintain that lead by always staying in the porn discourse.
And then we had a question online from John.
Yeah, I was going to ask if this pervasive surveillance that's going on was having any effect in removing the major objection to Pornhub, which is that it was being used to upload non-consensual porn and also the exploitation of minors.
Yeah, I can get into that one. It might be a slightly longer answer if that's okay. Because this is another area of research that I have written on. So Pornhub faced a huge high-profile scandal in 2020 that the site was trafficking and profiting from circulating non-consensual content, especially of minors. The thing about that is that was a PR. That was also a PR push that was driven by a massively influential evangelical anti-pornography lobby in the States that is currently in the process of trying to roll back trans rights. And this was one mechanism for them to also forward their own agenda. And that's not a conspiracy theory. There's very clear ties to that I have also written on, and I can point you towards some literature on that, because the claims made in the famous article that broke the story were that Pornhub was a unique perpetrator of this harm. Refusing to disclose that exponentially greater quantities of child pornography are circulated across like Skype, and are like truly exponentially higher quantities are circulated across Facebook. Meta properties are in a category of their own when it comes to child trafficking and child pornography. Like all platforms face difficulties of content moderation at scale. And this is not to say that Pornhub was doing a perfect job. They definitely should have been taking a more active role in content moderation. The way that platform business models profit disincentivizes proactive moderation because any amount of attention, including bad attention, is profitable. And those profits don't distinguish between the ethics of the content that's powering the traffic. So that's why we need regulators to impose these external factors that determine mandates for minimum standards of care around moderation on platforms. Because if you deputize private companies that are concerned with their profit margins to make those decisions, they're always going to prioritize the profit margins. So like certainly there was non-consensual content circulating on Pornhub, that is uncontestable. but at a scale that pales in comparison to any major social media network. But that was not the framing of the story. And that's part of this like very broad effort by these groups, Exodus Try, Nkosi, and campaigns like Trafficking Hub and like no fat movements, that if any of you are kind of familiar with this, have very close ties to white supremacist movements, have very close ties to like misogynist incel movements, and are on a political front, very tied to large, well-funded evangelical groups that are trying to roll back not just sexual expression online, but regress us to much more conservative roles when it comes to gender and sexuality at large. It's pretty bananas, frankly. I could go on about this for a while, but when it comes to Pornhub and the data surveillance, to speak directly to the question, they could have been doing more. They are surveying everything. They have the technological capacity to be much stricter about what is being uploaded, to be applying many more human moderators to processes that can determine if there's harmful content circulating on the site. But it's the exact same dynamic that leads white supremacist content to circulate on Twitter, or like misinformation to circulate on Facebook. It's just not in the platform's interests to cease the circulation of content ever, unfortunately. Once that scandal broke and their profit margins were threatened, Pornhub immediately instituted phenomenally strict verification standards that actually outstrip every other like content sharing platform on the internet to this day. In order to monetize content on Pornhub now, sex workers need to provide biometric facial scans and government issued photo ID, which like you'd be hard pressed to find a social media platform that requires that. And that's another can of fish around surveillance of precarious workers. But to this day, following that 2020 scandal, Pornhub actually has some of the strictest verification and content moderation practices you'll see on any platform at that scale. So it did institute change, just not for the obvious reasons. I don't know if that answered your question.
It was extremely interesting. My own question would go a little closer to whether they're using things like generative adversarial networks to actually identify specific frames, for example. But
yeah,
but you're close. They are?
They are now. Yeah, Pornhub is operating about a dozen various automated tools that are running 24/7 throughout their data, like their entire set of media. And it's a fraught topic because a lot of these, especially ones that are based in visual identification, it's not as much of a problem with metadata, but visual identification systems, like especially GANs, have a very hard time distinguishing between genders, between ages. They're terrible at non-white subjects, and they are almost like worthless when it comes to distinguishing, say, a young-looking, hot 19-year-old porn star from an underage like child. They're pretty good at distinguishing clothed subjects from naked subjects, but once they're naked, it's anyone's game.
Okay. Yeah. I was more thinking about identified subjects being identified. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of very bad stuff out there, but there's also a lot of circulating that goes on. And presumably, once you've caught a video, it should be like that video never goes up again.
Yeah, they do use. There's a proprietary fingerprinting software that they use, and they also use tools from Microsoft and several tools from the clearinghouses, the National Clearinghouse on like child trafficking in America. So they really are, they've like layered every solution. When I say that they are state of the art, they are state of the art. But once the popular narrative has taken hold that they're irresponsible, it's very difficult to claw that back.
Okay,
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to take up so much time.
I love this topic.
Jim, I think you had your hand first. I'll just.
Hi. Given all this algorithmic feedback loop, is the data that they're doing actually useful for understanding what people think? I mean, or has the has the feedback loop just sort of swallowed up all the information?
It's a little bit of both. It's less about
It's less helpful in understanding what people think, but it's definitely helpful in understanding kind of cultural flows of relevance. Like what I personally think about sexual expression or categories of pornography tends to be like unimportant in the scheme of policymakers who have these popular framings guiding the way that they are actually regulating these companies. So it's more that Insights has become this tool that is being treated like it is unassailable, verifiable data that is like has a really strong core when it is not. And you see legislators taking a hold of that. You see like popular media pundits taking hold of that, and it's really driving the way that they're talking about how the pornography industry works. How relevant is it that Pornhub claims people in Denmark love feet, or that men like wedgie porn more than women? But because we have so little to go on, there's such a data drought, because these are like there's a long cultural hangover of anti-pornography sentiments that mean that these companies aren't really willing and eager to disclose their numbers. People aren't really willing to ask because it's treated as an extremely unserious subject. So it's all we have. And unfortunately, that's really letting them dominate the conversation.
I think we have a question online from M.
Hi, you actually answered my question. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm gonna go to bed thinking about what the question was now.
I'll just give a space for anyone else if they have a question online before I go back to the room. But we'll go back to the room. Yeah, anyone in person? Over there. Thank you. And in the meantime, if we have any questions online, please drop a Q in the chat.
Thank you. That was a great presentation. You may have ruined porn for a lot of people, but this is unbelievable. When you're interacting with a platform like that, thinking about it from a technical capability standpoint, it's really eye-opening. My question goes back to the content moderation that we spoke about, and the non-consensual is one part, but I'm curious to know how they are tackling the fake videos, which is a whole different category, and now things that are coming up with AI. Do they have the infrastructure and the tools in place to detect and remove that? Is that something that they're actively working on?
Back over.
Yeah, this also is interesting because it speaks to John's question about technical capacity, because deepfakes, for those of you who are unfamiliar, are effectively digital collages where a pornographic video has the overlay often of the face of, they're frequently like young female celebrities. Sometimes sometimes the technology is used to like animate cartoon characters or pop culture figures. Sometimes it's, vengeance against exes. It's always very kind of like icky and non-consensual, but it's all generated through GAN networks. It's a type of machine learning that has grown quite sophisticated. As the last time I checked, Pornhub actually completely has banned deepfakes because they're too gray area. So they are moderated as a blanket policy off of the site. They also represent a very weird IP intersection where like legislators don't quite know what to do with them because they sort of represent fair use. And the best legal case that we have against deepfakes are actually like copyright violation suits by the pornography performers who are in the videos and the producers of the pornography. But again, in a cultural climate that degrades sex workers and treats all things pornographic as unimportant, you're really hard pressed to find legislators and lawyers and politicians who are going to stand up for the little pornographer, even though it's a totally regulated industry in this country. But like Pornhub just disallows it. A lot of sites are struggling with deepfakes. Unfortunately, there's no good answer because it's a nightmare to keep up with on a technological front because the people who are producing this content are tinkerers. Like they are really, I don't have to tell this firm, people who are enthusiasts are always at the leading edge of new technology. They are the ones who are playing, they are the ones who are pushing what the tech can do. And like Canadian Parliament is like a fossil compared to that. Like they are going to be talking about this maybe in 10 years. They're not keeping up. So we're having kind of like a legislative vacuum as well as a lack of technological tools that can really keep up with it as well. So they're just blanket banned. If there's any like GAN content in a video, it's just not permitted to be uploaded. And accounts get immediately frozen and taken down. Also, frankly, this is where verification becomes a lot more important than moderation in the system, because if in order to upload content, you had to produce a government issued photo ID, a biometric facial scan, you're probably a lot less likely to play it like fast and loose with non-consensual depictions and stolen like copyrighted content, right? So it tends to really just not really be a problem on Pornhub, but it is a huge problem everywhere else.
Quick follow-up on that.
Yeah.
Do they have any relevancy with that, or that would be like
This is one of the
So
foundational.
Just to recap,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, it was a follow-up about the broader company of MindGeek and what they're doing, just not Pornhub, or not just Pornhub specifically.
Yeah. Yeah, this is actually it's like a little history lesson baked into here, because this is one of the foundational governing principles of the internet. Back in 1996, which in internet time is like written on stone tablets, an American act called the Communications Decency Act established the distinction where platforms are not considered publishers. They are not considered broadcasters of content. They are not responsible for any of the content that appears on their sites at all. It's a clause, section 230 of the act. It's called safe harbor, and it determines that they are simply hosts. And so the individual users uploading the content are the publishers of that content. It's a very important act when it comes to limiting censorship and promoting free expression, because otherwise, if platforms were liable for everything on their sites, they would be extremely rigidly controlled spaces. You wouldn't be allowed to post pornography, certainly, on any of them, because it'd just be a big liability, which more recently, and I kind of blew through this in the talk, but in 2018, first time since 1996 that act was significantly amended was 2018 with legislation called SESTA FOSTA, which is like the Stop Online Sex Trafficking Act. And it makes platforms liable for content appearing on their sites in exactly one instance. And that is when that content can be interpreted as aiding or abetting sex trafficking. And the outcome is that platforms have started to shove sexual content on their sites because it presents this massive legal liability for these big companies that just don't want to take that on. It's at the core of why Tumblr banned all porn. It's at the core of why, you know, the female presenting nipple controversy on Instagram like took over our feeds for a while. It's at the core of why sites are demonetized, like why Visa and MasterCard demonetized Pornhub in 2020, because private companies see this as this huge liability. It's created a liability. It's not about hate speech or white supremacy or misogyny. It's like sexual expression has been the sticking point. It's unfortunate, but so no, they're not liable unless it's potentially sex trafficking.
Okay, thank you very much.